this message is about being an overcomer. And in Ezekiel 14, verses 14 and 20, we read about Noah, Daniel and Job. And for the sake of the length of this video, I'm taking the assumption that we know already about Noah, Daniel and Job and the situations that they found themselves in. But the common denominator between them was that they were overcomers. And our objective in this short message is to learn from that and see how we can apply that into our own lives. Well, first of all, Noah overcame the world. We know that as he built that ark, it would have taken a long time. He didn't have power tools. He worked alone. It wasn't a job, a project that he could have done in just a few days. It would have taken many years. And you can imagine, can't you, the ridicule that Noah encountered as he built that ark. People would have turned up out of boredom sometimes, nothing to do, let's go and mock Noah. People would have turned up just to laugh at him. And you can imagine kids, because kids are kids the world over, and they would have been relentless in their tormenting of this particular man. You could imagine people as well, perhaps more subtle, but even more dangerous in many ways, people coming alongside him and saying, come on Noah, you're a good man, you're a religious man, you think about God, but isn't this going a bit too far? So Noah had all of these things, whether it was outright ridicule or that more subtle eroding of his faith in God coming against him. But what Noah did was he stuck to the task. Even though the world stood against him, he stuck to what God had called him to do. And sometimes we say that the whole world is against us, or we think the whole world is against us. Well, in Noah's case, it certainly was. Jesus said, didn't he, in Luke 17, that people were eating, drinking, marrying and being given in marriage up to the day that Noah entered the ark. Noah stood alone, but he kept his faith in God. And we can as well. When the world stands against us, when the world comes against us, with our faith in God, we can stand firm and do what the Lord has called us to do. Secondly, we read about Daniel. Now, Daniel's enemy, inverted commas, was different to Noah's. Noah's was the world, Daniel's was the flesh. We know the story of how he was taken captive and in a situation where there was a lot of pressure on him, and the pressure would have been predominantly from himself. Well, I can eat anything and I can compromise and I can always say sorry afterwards, and God knows my heart, it doesn't really matter, these are just external things. All of those thoughts can come against us at times, but very often they are the thin end of the wedge. And when we give in on things that might not seem important, when we give in on those things, very often there's a whole series of consequences that come afterwards. And so Daniel, the pressure against him was from himself, really. When Daniel was faced with that choice, do I give in and do I compromise and do I try to move the goalposts, as we say? He didn't. He stood firm. The Bible talks about the flesh, the worldly nature, the old man, the sinful nature. It's there in every one of us. No matter how many years we've been serving the Lord, no matter how many years we've been rooted in the Christian faith, there's still that inner man that at times battles with the spiritual man. There are times of that conflict within us, and just like Daniel overcame the flesh, then we too can overcome the flesh. Daniel's reaction, Daniel's decision didn't make sense to the natural mind, but he trusted God and it worked. And there's a great lesson there for all of us, that when things don't make sense necessarily to the natural mind, but we trust God, it works. And Daniel is a great example to us. He didn't live by his feelings, but he lived by faith. And so we don't live according to the way that we see things from a natural point of view all the time. Although, let me say that I'm not saying that common sense is not important, that logic is not important, because those things are. And one of the biggest tragedies in the church is that so many believers don't use common sense or logic. But what I am saying is, when God is speaking to us, then we have to follow what God is saying, as opposed to following our natural thoughts, because the flesh is one of those things that will come against us, that will rob us of the victory that Jesus wants us to live in. So Noah overcame the world, Daniel overcame the flesh, and then finally Job overcame the devil. 3 different enemies that came against them, but united in the sense that they all came to remove that which God wanted to put in. And the story with Job, as I said at the beginning, assuming that we know all that, the story with Job is that he lost everything. Absolutely everything was taken from him. His wife even said to him, "Job, why don't you just curse God and die?" And his friends came along, weren't much help at times, were they? Tried to comfort him, but they didn't really bring that which Job needed at that time. Job had his faith in God. That was all he had. He kept that faith in God. He said to his wife, didn't he, in response to her question, why should we accept just good from God and not bad? In other words, he was a man whose faith was in God, and he wasn't believing in God for what he could get from him. He believed in God because he knew that God was good, regardless of what was going on around him. And Job, he kept his faith in the Lord. He maintained his faith in God. It won't be a case, if we are believers, if we are attacked, but rather when we are spiritually attacked. The question is not will we go through spiritual attacks during our life, but rather how will we react. Don't let the enemy have the victory. And Job is a wonderful example of that. A man who lost everything under this intense spiritual attack, and yet he kept his faith in God. He maintained his belief in the Lord, and we can learn so much from Job. In fact, we can learn so much from Noah. We can learn so much from Daniel. The world, the flesh, and the devil, the 3 things that will come against the believer to undermine our faith in God. But just like Noah, Daniel, and Job saw it through, battled on, kept their faith in the Lord, and came through victorious, then we too can come through victorious when we fix our eyes on Jesus and not on our situations and circumstances.